Welcome, Geek Side Podcast, to our spine-tingling first annual Halloween spectacular, or should I say, spooktacular. As always, I'm your host, Darth the Demented Sparrow, and with me, as always, is my ghoulish gang of co-hosts tonight. Starting off tonight, is the one, the only, Darren. Darren, what should be your cool, ghoulish nickname?
Oh my god. You know what? I've been preparing for my Simpsons nickname for 20 some odd years, and I've never actually nailed it. The closest I've ever gotten is Scarin.
Yes.
Scarin
generally. No, Mr. Scarin generally. Scarin, welcome to the show. How you doing tonight, my friend?
I'm good.
So Darren, you killed me tonight, man, when you popped on the screen, and I asked you what you were this evening. I totally guessed the wrong thing, but you have to tell everybody who you're dressed as tonight.
Well, we went with Shaft, and I said that was close, but yes. I was like, okay, considering I got both eyes, I decided to be Sensible Life Choices Nick Fury. So
What are some of the pearls of wisdom that Sensible Life Choice Nick Fury would have for the Avengers and crew, Darren?
Well, I mean, judging by wanting to keep the eye, don't touch that thing, especially if it's glowing.
Yes.
maybe don't go into that room alone. I said, maybe don't be the head of a multinational spy agency to begin with, and get your CPA license.
Yes.
Maybe the world needs,
but still dress awesome.
Exactly. I can be awesomely dressed as Nicholas J. Fury, certified public accountant.
You can dress the part, just don't play the part.
Exactly.
Because you will die.
Stay away from Robert Redford.
Yes.
Exactly.
He's not your friend.
No. Not
awesome, buddy. I love it. That's a good take on a favorite of mine. And also join us this evening is back from the grave to avenge I don't know who yet. The one, the only, Mrs. Christina Walker, aka the Crow.
Yes,
Christina, here's some cool history. Yes, this is some really cool history, and when I see you dressed up as the Crow, it makes me all giggly because when we first became friends and I was in a not good place, you're like, you know what? You and we're going to throw a Halloween party together. And you were dressed as the Crow for that Halloween party.
Yes, I was. A different costume, but yeah.
Yeah. And that's oddly and factually, that is your party was when me and my now wife became official.
Yeah, that's right.
Was that your party? Yes.
Yay!
That was 5 years ago on Friday, on the 27th. So
yeah. Where does time go?
It's been a crazy journey since then, my friend. Has it not?
It really has. I don't know where time goes. Sometimes it feels like it's been forever, and sometimes it feels like no time at all has passed.
That was just 2 days ago. I'm excited to be here with you, my friend, celebrating Halloween, which is one of our favorite holidays. But you know what? We decided that we can't just celebrate Halloween by ourselves. We have to bring somebody cool and awesome, somebody who could really set the Halloween mood for us tonight on the Geek Side Podcast. And we had him on the Capes Crew podcast, and I said, you know what? We got to bring this guy to our show and to bring his beautiful brand of horror to all the new fans and followers and listeners. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to welcome back one of my favorite guests, always, the one, the only, our very own master of horror, Mr. Scott J. Larson. Scott, welcome back, my friend.
Thanks a lot. I'm here on a Ghost to Ghost network. I'm in Chicago, and you guys are in California, right?
No.
Yes, we are, sir.
Okay.
I'm in Texas right now.
Okay.
I'm in Alabama.
So this is truly Ghost to Ghost.
Yes.
Absolutely, my friend. Scott, man, what have you been doing since the last time we talked, my friend?
I've been running around quite a bit, actually. I just came back from the Chicago Ghost Conference a couple weeks ago, and I have 4 words for everybody: the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult.
Ooh.
Have you guys heard of this at all?
No, but I need to go there.
Yes.
Well,
Listen,
it's
man.
traveling, so it'll come to you.
Oh, right, traveling.
Even better.
Is it going to come to California, Scott?
My guess is it probably will come to California. It's originated in Kentucky.
Okay.
And I saw them at the Chicago Ghost Conference this year, and they've been traveling around. Basically, has anyone ever seen Friday the 13th, the TV show?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
it was basically a show about people who went and hunted cursed objects. Well, the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult actually has haunted objects that they take around to different things, different events.
I want to go.
Yes. What's so spooky and awesome?
It is truly the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. And once I later on in the show, when I start telling you some ghost stories, there are a few things that tie into there.
Oh, okay.
But I thought it would be a good way to like do a little icebreaker and just mention them.
Ooh, that's beautiful. And Scott, you filled us in on some late breaking news when you came on the show. You have a new assistant apparently.
Oh.
Tell the listener, Scott, about your assistant.
You know, I've been going around. I've been meeting a lot of people. I've been seeing different cemeteries, and one day I turned around and this thing kind of followed me home.
Literally,
actually, the truth is, when I took her to the Chicago Ghost Conference, the stuff there was so weird and creepy that I had her zipped up in my bag, and I refused to open up the bag for 2 weeks because I don't know. My stuff was there overnight. I don't know what she was exposed to, but I thought I would wait for a little while before letting her out.
That seems reasonable.
It's like I've come home.
It's like, hello,
well, once her
guys.
eyes start moving towards me, if you guys see that, let me know.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. We're like, Scott,
Run.
Scott, run. So my friend, for the people that have not heard you previously on one of our other podcasts, tell these lovely people about your amazing book, Visitations.
Well, Visitations is the history. It's billed as the history of Chicago, but it's really, Chicago plugs into so many different areas in the country, especially its early history. It's the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. And it's kind of like a ghost justice league. The story starts in the turn of the century, and it'll go to present day or however long I live. I'm not quite sure, and I'm going really, really slowly on it. But it came about a number of years ago. I had found out that I had some ancestors buried in a historical cemetery here in Chicago called Graceland Cemetery, not to be confused with the place where Elvis is buried. And when I walked into Graceland the first time, the first thing I saw was a statue of death. And it's this monument called Eternal Silence, and it literally looks like the Spectre from DC Comics. And so it was a very haunting experience, if you'll pardon the pun. And there were so many different monuments there and so many cool things that something kind of plugged into my subconscious, because I went to bed one night, I woke up the next day, and the plot for the entire first issue of Visitations was in my head. And so each issue is kind of set up to there are about 6 or 7 characters, and each issue has a main character that goes through all the issues. But in addition to that, it also spotlights one of the other members of the team as it is. So so far, the most popular character is a girl named Nellie McCullough, and she has a skeletal horse named Kincaid. And so cool. She is the star of the second issue. The second issue, which I just happen to have right here, is the hold on a second. I might as well show you all. It's the Great Balloon Disaster.
Yes.
And so the book is designed actually with every issue of the book, I'm trying to do something different. So the first issue is basic. The first issue which is right here, is the introduction to the characters. The second issue is it follows Nellie and Kincaid, but I've got it set up, and I'll show you this really, really quickly.
Yes.
It's set up as double page spreads. And as the story goes, the reader is required to turn it.
Oh, that's cool.
Again.
So beautiful.
And again.
Mm-hmm.
And again. And it goes on and on and on and on and on.
Something like this, my friend, something like this is like just drives home, like, for people like me, that digital is not always better. I mean,
right.
It's hard to do that on digital. I love that. I love that you freaking have this thing worked in your book that you have to have a real book to really fully enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? One of the things that I learned with digital is you can zoom in on one panel. And if the artist does it right, as you flip through the panels instead of the pages, it's almost like a mini movie. And so I'll have an issue coming up that will be better in digital than it is in print.
Yeah,
that's cool too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So the third issue is a point of view story. So you're actually the main character in the book. And
nice.
you're kind of going around this area of Chicago, which is extinct. It doesn't exist anymore. It's called the Levee. And the Levee District was the birthplace of organized crime. It was basically where Al Capone got his start, but it was also, it was a bunch of gambling dens and houses of prostitution. And so you get to see like all kinds of scary stuff there that isn't necessarily ghost scary, but human being scary. And then the fourth issue is actually going to be a painted story like the Alex Ross, Paul Dini Justice League books that the oversized things they did a few years ago. But in addition to the painted story, there's going to be a downloadable audio file, and it's going to be done in the style of a 1940s radio show.
Oh, cool.
And so it's going to have actors playing the parts. And as it goes on, you'll get part of the story by listening to that. You'll get part of the story by reading the book, but you basically get the whole interactive experience. And then after that, I have no clue what I'm doing.
Scott, let me ask you real quick, man. So what inspires you to do these different, we'll say, themes with the book, like, you know, the turning over or the digital, or like, how do you come up with these different ideas for each book? Are they at all inspired by the character you're focusing on, or something different?
Something a little bit different. I had read that that book that was put out by Dark Horse a few years ago, and it was Will Eisner and Frank Miller kind of talking to each other. And they kept talking about the comic book industry and the way that things are not being utilized. You know, one of the things that 90s comics brought was people actually started breaking out of panels, which characters weren't doing before that. But we're kind of stuck in this has to be done like this, and you can't move from that. And I think that doesn't give the reader enough credit. And I really want it to be an interactive experience with part of what I'm doing is I'm just kind of going along as, oh, hey, this would be cool. It's like I'm going to have a story about the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, which is this famous thing, and I'm thinking of doing it as a board game. But I'm not quite there yet. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that. I would love to do a pop-up book. And it's not necessarily inspired by the character, but it's just the idea of doing something different and having the reader get his or her hands dirty, which is important to me.
I like it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think that's great. Do you find that that people are more receptive to interacting with media now? Because I think like all the ideas that you're talking about sound interesting to me, in the sense that I would love to be able to pick up something and then the next issue just have a completely different experience. So it's like, how does that make you? How does that inform you creatively? Like, what do you just what I'm asking is, like, when you sit down and decide what you want to do next, like, how out there do you go? How out there do you go?
I want to go as out there as humanly possible without being Grant Morrison. I like the idea of just doing something that nobody's seen before and nobody's utilized before. As far as the way people are reacting to it, it's funny because you go to comic conventions and from the artist side of the table, there's different experiences. There's some conventions where people are very interested in what you're saying. And then there are the other conventions when they want to move as far away from you as quickly as humanly possible. And I've seen a little bit of both. But one of the things that happens is the more movement I have at my table, whether they want to look at it or not, they're kind of drawn to it. I've got a bunch of props now and a bunch of toys, including my friend here, who where if I'm able to have access to electricity, things will move. And I was at a convention earlier this month, and people did not want to look over. And as they were walking past the table, I could see their eye like moving towards me and them trying to pull their face away from their eye. So so people are interested in that. And as far as the comic is concerned, they seem delighted by it. And I had another illustrator who was sitting next to me at one of the conventions, and he heard me telling people about it, and he just turned to me and said, "Can I see that? Oh, I'll take a copy." And so people seem interested, but it's really a matter of trying to get someone's attention in the first place. And there's so many different things that are out there. There's so many different things happening at conventions, whether they're big or small, that I think that the patrons don't necessarily want to see. They want to see, but they don't want you to see that they're seeing, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, so you guys go to conventions. How do you react to different artist alley tables? What gets your attention? What are you guys interested in?
Scott, one of the things that draws me a lot is definitely artwork. I look at a lot of artwork. I mean, even if it's not necessarily a genre that I'm interested in, I try to walk pretty close to the artist alley tables, and I'm just looking up and down at all the different artwork. And if there's, something that's a style that I like or similar to an artist that I appreciate, I'm definitely going to stop and look. And stuff like what you're talking about, where they have props and things hanging up, that will definitely stop me.
Oh yeah.
I'm good, but I'm like, huh? Like, what's that? Like a small child. I'm like, it's moving. Can I touch it? Yeah.
I tend to be drawn in by detail, like especially when I see someone, if they have like pencil sketches, if they have ink, if they have inks, just something where I can see details. But also when they have like props there, they have something that looks like a fully formed idea. That draws me in a little bit more than, this is my interpretation of Batman. It's like, okay, it looks amazing. You've drawn an amazing Batman, but what's you? I want to see you. Like I'm walking by an artist alley. I want to see your interpretation of something I've never seen before.
Yeah.
How about you, Christina?
You guys actually, nailed exactly what I look for when I walk around Artist Alley, because when I first started going to conventions, it was just sort of looking for the stuff that I happen to like. So Star Wars or X-Men. And then I started realizing all of the art that I was buying was piling up. So I started getting really picky about it. So it really takes a really special type of style to catch my eye, or the way they set up their booth, if it's interactive, or they like to engage you a lot, which is always fantastic. Whether that be like, oh, you can win a print, or the artist will engage you in like maybe your costume if you're a cosplayer. But like Darren said, I like to be able to see them and like how they see the world, not just a simple like reproduction of something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, when you guys go to conventions, are you cosplaying?
I do most of the time.
Yeah, I would say 75% of the time, yes.
Okay.
I haven't gotten to that point yet. I kind of go with the whole business mind of, I got, like things I need to hit, and then I'm usually like toting a child or two. But I think the next time I go, I'm definitely gonna cosplay. I may go as sensible Nick Fury.
Yes. I'm gonna get you a shield name badge, buddy.
Right.
Absolutely, you need to do that. So one more question on this. So when you're cosplaying and you're walking through Artist Alley, how many of the artists are engaging you because you're cosplayers, and are they at all? And what are they saying?
For me, it depends, and my experience will probably be a little different than Will's because I'm a female. But um, uh, sometimes it's patronizing, oddly enough. And sometimes it's really cool because they get excited that I'm in a certain costume. I'm trying to think of one in particular, probably my post-apocalyptic Alice in Wonderland, who happens to be, it's a costume that I designed from somebody's artwork. My really good friend Tess Fowler, she drew all the princesses as apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic, and I chose Alice. And a couple of the artists were like, "Oh wow, that was really cool." And then I told them about her, and then they got all excited. We're like, "That was a really good idea. I should think of something like that." And yeah, I mean, like it's fun to do that. And that's another example of when you make your own art and people get inspired by it, and then you cosplay it, and then it inspires other people to do something crazy and awesome. But yeah, I mean,
how is Tess?
I mean, the
what was that? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. How is Tess doing?
She seems to be doing great. I don't live in LA anymore, so I don't get to see her very often. But yeah,
she was doing all that. She was doing the charm stuff for a while, right?
I think so. I follow her personal page more than her art page, of course, because I know her now. but yeah, I mean, like that's the thing is like her art, because it is so, I guess, different now too. I think she's working on a couple comics right now too. I think for like variant covers and stuff, if I remember correctly.
Nice.
But, yeah.
As far as my experience has gotten in that area, typically if I feel like I get more interaction walking through Artist Alley with really well-known characters that I cosplay as, like Jack Sparrow or Tony Stark. Usually somebody just like looking up while they're sketching or something, like, "Hey Tony," kind of that kind of thing, you know what I mean? It's kind of one of those things. So nothing really like too monumentally prolific that I've had experience-wise, but yeah, I do get, shouts here and there from different people when I'm walking through Artist Alley in costume.
I'm curious about that because one of the things that I do, because I realize that cosplayers, all cosplayers, when they go, they take the time to make costumes. They take the time to dress up, and I try to make the experience. I try to make the experience for anyone who comes over to my table special, but the cosplayers especially. And so I usually have a contest for them. And it involves having their name on a tombstone in one of the issues of the books. So any cosplayer who's foolish enough to walk by my table and lets me get their attention, I end up getting their name, and then there's a drawing, and it's usually my wife who just like sticks her hand into a great big pile of papers and pulls out a name or two. But it's fun. People seem to enjoy it.
That's awesome.
So exciting, man. You're like, as a geek and somebody who reads comics, like I would love to see anything remotely resembling me or related to me in a book. That's like, that's super amazing, man. That's a great way to get people to your booth. Lure them in. Scott, before we move on to the bewitching half hour of the show, you mentioned that one of the fan favorite characters is Nellie. What is one of your favorite characters in your books?
Well, I'm the father of all of them, so that's
it's like picking a favorite child.
Yeah, they're all my children to a certain extent. One of the things with the characters is I know primarily where they're going, and I know some of the fates, but I also know the characters that are coming after them. So I've got a number of different series. The first series is the turn of the century. The second series is going to be the 1920s. And as a matter of fact, in issue number 3, you meet some of the characters from the 1920s, and I'm looking forward to exploring those particular characters. So I don't know if I have a particular favorite. The main character, Clayton Blackwood, is actually patterned after my brother-in-law. So every time I see him, I'm like, stand still, and I gotta grab my camera and take a picture of him, and that's kind of fun. And I think their personalities are really, really different, and so that makes him as a character even more fun for me. And so I think that he's a character who will run through all of it. So I'm probably going to get really tired of him at one point. But I don't think I have a particular favorite. There's some that I'm dreading getting to. And it's like there's one where it's just a skull. It's basically this guy. And I know where I'm going with it, but I don't quite know how I'm going to handle it. And so I'm dreading it a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, it might make for some challenges, I guess. Just focusing on a skull.
Yes.
Yes. Awesome, buddy. Before we tell some awesome ghost stories, where can our listeners find you and your book specifically online?
I can be found on Facebook at Scott Larson Illustration. I can be found on Twitter, although I'm hardly ever on Twitter, at God, I should really have this stuff more available to me. Hold on one second. So I'm on, I have a website. It's visitationscomicbook.com. I'm on Twitter at Scott J. Larson Art. I am on Instagram, and I think that's also Scott J. Larson Art. And I think the main place is Facebook at Scott Larson Illustration, but I kind of like go through all of those. Most photographs end up on Instagram. Twitter is really tough. It's it's one of those things where it's almost like a drive-by. It's like you're holding up a sign and it's like 10 people have passed by and nobody's looked, and so I don't care much for it. But Instagram and Facebook, I think that I spend more time on social media wise.
Okay, awesome, buddy.
And real quickly, the first issue of Visitations is available to anyone for no cost digitally. Mm-hmm. And you can, if you email me at visitationscomicbook@gmail.com, I am happy to send a PDF out to anybody who would like one. And Christina and Darren will be getting one later tonight, by the way. Just so.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Some goodies to read tomorrow, friends, on Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Larson, one of my favorite podcast traditions is to hear you come up with awesome and new ghost stories to tell us. So, sir, without further ado, take it away.
Well, but before I start, Will and I did this broadcast last year. And yes. when we did it, I actually I had like these prepared stories, and I had like this piece of paper like just out of camera range, and it's like I misspelled that word. I don't know what I'm saying, but I had particular stories where it's like, okay, this is my California story, this is my Chicago story, this is this story, and that's that story. And one of the things that's happened, one of the really cool things about going to conventions is, and not even necessarily the ghost conventions, but the Chicago conventions, are over the course of the past few months, I've been doing Chicago ghost stories with a local ghost hunter / historian named Amelia Cotter. And so we were at Wizard World Chicago, and we had a packed house, which was really fun. And we did the same thing at C2E2 and had a packed house there as well, which was mind blowing. I've never like been in a room where every seat was taken, and I'm like, oh, is this microphone working? But people people like the ghost stories, and people want to talk about the ghost stories, and they want to talk about their ghost stories. And being in Chicago, we have certain legends that we all know, and I'm sure that it's the same for you guys. There's particular ghost stories from California and from Texas. And where are you, Darren?
Well, I'm in Alabama, but I'm from Chicago.
Okay. Oh, you are from Chicago.
And I'm from California.
Where are you from?
South side.
Okay, where on the south side?
Oh, around 87th and Bennett, between there and 73rd and Rhodes, like that whole area. Grew up in.
So how far from Resurrection Cemetery were you?
God, Resurrection. I honestly couldn't tell you. Like, honestly, it's been so long. I literally haven't been home in almost like over a decade.
But you know why I just asked about Resurrection Cemetery?
Oh, Resurrection Mary, yeah.
Sure. So Will heard my version of Resurrection Mary last year. Well, tell us your version of that story.
Oh God, Resurrection Mary. I think one of the things is it's always because because I grew up on the South Side. Like it's never been it's always been one of those things where you heard about it on something like Svengoolie. So, yeah. So it was God. Was she's the Resurrection Mary? Oh, the Hitchhiker. Like not the Hitchhiker. Yeah. So it's basically the story I always heard about Resurrection Mary was there was a guy who was on his way to prom. He drops his date off. He goes out with his girl. He's trying to get lucky. He doesn't. When she rejects him, he takes her home. On his way back, he's passing Resurrection Cemetery. He sees a young lady. He picks her up. He drives her. They talk. They start getting into it. He still doesn't close the deal. He drops her off at a house somewhere. I cannot remember where, and then he leaves, and turns out he finds out she was dead or something. I don't know. It's very. I've heard variations of the same story many different ways.
So yeah, that's pretty close. Resurrection Mary he was right. It's a hitchhiking ghost, and she's standing out there. There's a street called Archer Avenue, and Archer Avenue is the most haunted street in Chicago. And Resurrection Cemetery is right on Archer Avenue, as was the Willowbrook Ballroom and a number of other places. And people see ghost lights out there all the time, which are glowing orbs. With Resurrection Mary, she is the most famous ghost in Chicago. I grew up hearing about Resurrection Mary. Anybody who's in the city grew up hearing about it. The thing that I didn't realize as I've been going to conventions, and I'll give a spiel and I'll start talking about, oh, hey, Resurrection Mary, blah, 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 blah. And my book is not about real Chicago ghost stories. But it's more of an action adventure. But I do know the stories, and as time has gone on, I've picked them up. And I was at Wizard World last year, and this girl came up to me and she said, "Well, my mom saw Resurrection Mary." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, my mom was a little girl. She used to play out by Archer Avenue. She saw her out there all the time." And I said, "That's interesting. Well, what was she doing?" "Well, she was just standing there." And I was at another convention, and someone came up to me and said, "Well, I saw her." And I said, "Well, what happened when you saw her?" Now, Resurrection Mary, what happens is someone's driving down the street. There's a girl out by the side of the road. The person picks her up. They pass by Resurrection Cemetery, and she disappears from the car or truck or whatever. So somebody told me that there is a gas station kitty corner from Resurrection Cemetery, and he and his parents were in there, and this was the early 90s, and his parents were inside the gas station. He was in the car. He was looking out his back seat, and he sees this girl on the side of the road, and the semi-truck comes and picks her up, and it gets to the cemetery, and it slams on its brakes, and he felt that it slammed on his brakes because she disappeared. And he said that he had never heard the story until after that, and then he kind of pieced it together. And then someone else came up to me at that same convention and said, "Well, we used to see her." And I said, "Where?" "Well, right outside the cemetery." And I said, "Well, what were you doing by the cemetery?" "Well, we were teenagers. We were hanging outside the cemetery. We were just kind of messing around. We weren't doing anything." And she was out there all the time. And I said, "Well, did you go talk to her?" And they're like, "No, I wasn't going to do that." And I said, "Well, what did she look like?" "She had dirty blonde hair. You could see through her sometimes, and sometimes you couldn't. And then she was just always out there." And then, so I'm like, "Oh, can I tell that story?" And that starts being folded into my little spiel. And I started telling someone else this, and she said, "My grandfather picked her up." And I said, well, what happened? Well, he was a trucker. He was coming home and he picked her up and she disappeared when they got to the cemetery. Then he found out about it. So it's one of the things I know that Will and I had talked a little bit about this before when we were talking about ghosts. Will asked me, do you believe this stuff? And I'm like, nah. But with Resurrection Mary and some of the other stuff, you hear it over and over from different, and this one particularly, since I've heard it from a bunch of different sources, the same story, and it's more than just a legend. It's like a living, breathing person standing in front of me saying, I saw her. It's a little bit different. And it's been a really, really strange experience. One of the stories that I've heard several times is about a place called Bachelor's Grove. Bachelor's Grove is in Midlothian, Illinois. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and then I'm going to tell you about what the traveling museum of the paranormal and occult did over there. So Bachelor's Grove is this little cemetery, and then right next to it is this forest, or basically this wooded area that stretches about a mile and a half across. And the cemetery it's old. Darren, have you heard of Bachelor's Grove?
I've heard of it. I haven't heard a lot of the stories about it. But,
okay.
You know, yeah.
Well, I've known about it for the past year and a half or so, and I never really thought anything of it until I started to kind of discover more about it. So it's this little cemetery, and the cemetery itself has been vandalized a number of times. People have gone in, they've knocked down tombstones, they've spray painted, they put like Nazi signs on there, all kinds of crap like that. And they've gone into the woods and they've done little ceremonies that they probably shouldn't be doing. And it's one of those places, it's one of those places that attracts like really strange people. So, but the thing with Bachelor's Grove is there is a photograph out there, and if you look it up online, a Chicago Sun-Times reporter took this photograph of one of the tombstones, and when the photograph came back, there's a woman that's sitting on the tombstone, and the woman was not there when the reporter took the photograph. And it's right online. You'll see it if you look for it. But the thing about that is there's the cemetery and then there's the wooded area. And there is something in the woods that attracts people into the woods. And so people will go to the cemetery, and sometimes it's a woman, sometimes it's a ghost light, sometimes it's a smell. It's all kinds of different stuff. And so people get lured into the woods, and all of a sudden they can't find their way out. And so the wooded area is about a mile and a half long, and they'll be trudging through the woods, and they'll see a house, and they'll start moving towards the house, and then the house won't be there. Or there's a highway off on the side, and they'll walk over towards where the highway is, and then the highway won't be there anymore. And there are these lapses of time, and this is something that I've heard, that I know of people who have experienced this. So people will go in there, and they'll be in there for hours and hours and hours and not being able to find their way out. And then by the time they find their way out, they're drained of energy. And so whatever is in there attracts people in and drains energy from them. One of the stories I heard was the teenagers who go in there and decide to have sex and fool around. They are more susceptible to it than anything else, because whatever is in there is feeding on their energy. And the people who finally find their way out are drained of energy. They can barely stay awake, and there's something addictive about it. And so people keep going back over. And once you go in, you want to keep going back. There was my friend Amelia Cotter, who I had mentioned a little bit earlier. She had gone in there with a group of people, and there was like this time slip where she completely lost track of time. Everybody was walking around like a zombie, and they got out of the wooded area eventually after hours and hours and hours of spending time in there. And the van that they came and pulled up, and all of the people, I think there were like 6 of them, they all kind of filed into the van and sat there and didn't say a word until they got back into the city. And she said something to the effect of she didn't want to think about what she experienced in there, because she knew whatever it was that was in there would know that she was thinking about it.
Oh my god.
No, no.
So
That's crazy.
yeah, it's and so, you know, and I'm hearing these stories. She also told me about a friend of hers, or someone who became like a former friend, who got addicted to going, and he was going every single day, and he was apparently going in there and sitting in a tree and watching portals open and close, whatever that means.
I was going to ask you, Scott, like, do these people ever report what they see or what they experience when they're in this forest?
No, Will, because the thing will know.
Yes. Damn it.
Are you not listening?
I know.
But what's really funny is I think a lot of those stories that kind of got just combined and combined together, and the way it's spread out throughout the city. I think that's kind of where I heard so many different types of stories that they all kind of ran into one. Like you couldn't have like, because I think that's the reason why I heard so many different types of Resurrection Mary stories.
Well, everybody's experience is going to be different.
Yeah.
Right, because there was some that were conflating it with Bachelor Cemetery, and that whole area.
Ugh.
So
well, Bachelor's Grove is in a different area than where Resurrection Cemetery is. It's in a completely different area.
Right. I just mean just just tales of like ghost stories from Illinois, because there are people like who kind of conflate the same stories with the H.H. Holmes stories from the city. There's so many different variations on those. So yeah, I know what you mean.
It's a really strange thing talking to people who've actually had this experience. There's a difference between talking to people who've had the experience and hearing like the legend stuff. You know, it's like the legend of Bigfoot. It's like, yeah, right, okay, whatever. But when you hear this, where someone you know is looking at you saying, "Oh no, I went in there and lost 8 hours of my life," you know, it's a whole different thing. So the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. These people are from Kentucky. They have people who are sending them cursed or haunted objects. And one of the objects they got was one of those Ouija board things. You know, the thing that everyone puts their hands on and someone moves it and pretends like nobody's
moving it. Ouija board cursor, I guess
right.
I'll say, right?
So they had, yeah, right, exactly. That's exactly what it is. So somebody had one of those from Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and they tried to burn it, and they couldn't burn it. And they showed it to me, and they were like, all these scorch marks on it. So while they're in Chicago, they decided to take it back to Bachelor's Grove and do like a little Ouija board thing. And
as one does.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the Facebook post, and I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? Get out of there. You know?
Yes, yeah. God, it's terrible, man. That's gross.
It's pretty warped. I mean, the whole thing is.
Yes.
So I think that's my main ghost story for the night.
Yes.
It is sufficiently creep me out.
Yeah.
Scott, what is there any other I guess we'll say well-known local stories or legends from Chicago that you could tell the kiddies about tonight?
There's numerous ghost stories and legends about Chicago. So I talked about Resurrection Cemetery and Resurrection Mary. You know, it's the hitchhiking ghost, blah 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 blah. The thing with the Resurrection Cemetery, it is on a street called Archer Avenue, and Archer Avenue starts in a place called Chinatown. Okay. And Chinatown used to be the levee district that I had mentioned earlier that's going to be featured in issue 3 of Visitations. And it kind of runs down through a suburb called Justice, Illinois. And that's where Resurrection Cemetery is. And people, the reported sightings over there are more than just Mary. It's also there is a ghost hearse with a horse. It's a horse-drawn carriage carrying the body of a dead baby boy, or a dead boy rather, and which, if you think about it, the horses, since they're ghost horses, they're probably dead too. Everybody is dead. Sure. But people, they've heard horses galloping down the street and going into the cemetery. There is an apparition in the cemetery, and it's really funny. Someone came up to me at a convention and told me about this, and I actually drew what they were what they were talking about as they were talking about it. And Amelia, the ghost historian / ghost hunter, was standing next to me, and I turned to her and I said, "Had you ever heard about this?" And she's like, "No." So there's an apparition in Resurrection Cemetery, and I'm curious if Darren has heard of this. In addition to Resurrection Mary, so he's known as the Smiling Man. Have you heard of the Smiling Man, Darren?
I already don't like this.
I've definitely heard the name. I have not heard the story.
Okay. Well, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw the picture of the Smiling Man for you.
Oh, good.
And while I'm saying here, this is here is a piece of free art that everybody will be able to see on there. So the Smiling Man has a top hat, I guess.
Okay.
And
again, as one does,
long black hair.
You have to be creepy and dapper.
Yes.
Yes. And the fun thing about him is he has no face, with the exception of his smile, which is a bunch of pointed teeth. So if you want to my guess is he looks something like this.
The Babadook?
Yes, kind of. Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yes.
Ugh.
So he is actually in the cemetery. There is the main Chicago ghost hunter right now is a woman named Ursula Bialski. And she actually wrote a book about Baxter's Grove. But when I heard the story, I texted her and I'm like, "Have you ever heard of this?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's in my book, blah, 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 blah." So she knew of it, and clearly I hadn't read her book because otherwise I would have known about it. But yeah, the theory behind this guy is that he's Resurrection Mary's father. But I think that they were kind of from different eras, so that's kind of been debunked a little bit. So yes, the Smiling Man runs out from behind like tombstones and attacks people, or runs up to them or whatever. I mean, he doesn't say anything. He just smiles.
I feel like if I was a ghost, I would probably fuck with people all the time too. I mean, why not?
That's terrible.
And you've got nothing but time. So.
Yep.
Yes. Christina, I believe you have maybe a sort of story to tell us this evening.
I do. I have a personal one from my childhood, but I also wanted to say, Steve had mentioned that like each state or each city or whatever has their own ghost stories, and my favorites, of course, are from the Queen Mary, which is like I visited that ship many times, and it is when there's not a lot of people around, you can definitely feel it. And there's many different stories from there. There's a little girl in the pool. There's the guy that got crushed in the watertight door. There's a story about them colliding with another ship in World War II. I think it was World War II, and splitting that ship in half. And so apparently you can hear people screaming and water rushing in if you're in the certain part of the ship, which the whole thing just totally fascinates me. So if you do yourself a favor and just like Google some of the ghost stories, I have several books in my house and I read it every once in a while and I creep myself out. It's awesome. The other one, it's not really a ghost story in Fresno, but kind of is what they're called the Fresno Walkers. And they're really creepy. Just Google that. There's video of them. And they're these weird, creepy white figures that are about maybe a foot or two tall, just like walking around. And they're creepy, but they're also kind of cute and nobody knows what they are. And it gave me the serious willies when I like Googled it one time. You know, like you get in those spirals of, I'm gonna look up one thing. Oh God, now I'm gonna look up another thing. And that's another thing. And now I'm never sleeping because I read all these horror stories. But that's like how I found those Fresno Walker things. But my personal story.
Sorry.
Well, my personal story was I was probably about 7 or so. And I marked that time because of me switching bedrooms in our house. And I never liked this bedroom. Not because it was the smallest of the bedrooms, but because it always gave me, like, my hair would always stand on my arms for whatever reason. And as far as I know, I mean, our house really isn't haunted. My parents bought it brand new. Nobody died in it. I don't think we're on any kind of burial ground. So that's what makes it kind of weird. But I started sleeping with a light on, like a night light in that room, because I would have all these horrible dreams. As soon as I moved into that room, nightmares almost every single night. The kind that, like, you wake up and you're frozen. and you can't move even though you're awake. And I don't mean like night terrors where you're still asleep and you can't do anything. Like I could still say something, but I couldn't move and I was sweating and it was terrifying. My mom put a nightlight in my room. I wake up one morning, like maybe around 3 a.m., and my nightlight has this weird, like greenish glow around it. And I'll never forget it because I woke up thinking that was weird. And I was like, oh, maybe like the light is dying or whatever.
Mhm.
So I kind of look around, and by my front, or like the front door, my bedroom door, it was closed, which I thought was weird because I always slept with my door open because I was catty cornered from my parents' room and I could see right in there. And I slept better that way. And I think that I see my mom standing there.
Mhm.
Like whatever this figure is wearing my mom's exact house coat and like has her hair, but its back is turned. And so I remember like asking my mom, like, what are you doing in my room? Why is the door closed? And it doesn't move at all. So then I start freaking out a little bit and I'm like, mom, like trying to get her attention. And I remember like it slowly starts like turning like what you would see in a horror movie towards me,
Yeah.
and I don't have any idea what it looked like because I started screaming like my head off, like
Yeah.
like I was being murdered. So my mom and dad bust in the room, and I told them what happened, and I'm screaming and crying, and like I ended up sleeping in their room for the next couple of nights. But like I remember that so vividly, and my parents like every once in a while I'll like ask them about it again just to make sure I'm not making it up, and they're like, no, that really happened. Like we don't think you saw a ghost, but they're like, you definitely freaked out that night, and your nightlight was a weird color that night, and we could never figure out why it turned that weird like green color, and it was fine the rest of the time. But that scared the crap. The fact that that thing like looked exactly like my mother will always like freak me the f out. So whenever I wake up in the middle of the night from a bad dream, I don't like opening my eyes.
Yes.
I definitely don't. I don't look looking at mirrors. I don't like looking towards the bedroom door because of that night.
Yes.
So that's my story.
Ooh, that's creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. I have not so much. Well, it's a bit of a it's a bit more of a history of a local legend, and I think Scott, you've mentioned you've heard about this place, and Christine has definitely heard about it, being from Fresno. But not too long ago, there was a place called Wolf Manor in Clovis, which is the town right next to Fresno. And Wolf, when I first came into introduction to Wolf Manor, I knew it as a local haunted attraction that would open every year for Halloween. But once I kind of was like old enough to go there and be brave enough to actually go through the haunt and everything, I started hearing some really interesting stories about Wolf Manor. And one particular story actually came from my mom, who claims to have worked there at some point in as a teenager back in the early 60s. But I did a little digging on Wolf Manor's history, and so I just kind of wanted to share, maybe those of you who haven't heard about our local claim to fame here in Clovis. Wolf Manor was built in 1922 as an opulent mansion for young tycoon Anthony Andreotti. It was, and obviously Clovis even now is always just kind of like, people you hear from Clovis, they're like, oh, you're kind of rich and snutty in Clovis, okay? Yeah. And apparently it was that way even then. Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Clovis has always been what they call the gateway to the Sierras, and unfortunately, his great estate didn't bring him the happiness he hoped for. The high cost of the building upkeep eventually forced Andreotti into bankruptcy, which led to his demise as he turned to alcohol and meant early death in 1929 at the ripe old age of 36 years old. But his tragedy was just the beginning. 1935, after the manor had sat vacant for some time, it was reopened as Hazelwood Sanitarium, which housed patients dying from tuberculosis. In 1942, the Telford family purchased the building and it became the Clovis Avenue Sanitarium. Its new role was to serve both the mentally and physically ill from close-knit Clovis community. While some visited the hospital for common physical ailments and even to give birth, more often it housed people with mental illness that were otherwise shunned from society. Families dropped off loved ones suffering from schizophrenia and dementia and never returned to visit. East, which was when my mom was born, a 10,000 square foot wing was added to the sanitarium. There were 18 additional rooms to the house, a new population of patients, the elderly. And this is where my mom's story came in. She said that she worked there as a, I don't know what you call them. They called them candy stripers back in the day.
Oh yeah.
But she said the elderly population was not treated well there, and she feels like that alone created enough negative energy to kind of corroborate all the scary horror stories that you hear about this place. But packed with up to 10 beds, and a single nurse could be assigned to 22 patients. Conditions declined rapidly, and the quality of care was poor, causing many to suffer behind closed doors. Um, Goes on to talk about the town of Clovis was a quaint and scenic and most considered a sanitarium a black market in its otherwise idyllic spot. Emergency workers dreaded answering calls from the residents because they usually meant someone had died. When things were busy, Clovis staff would store the corpses of the newly dead in the building's cool basement until they could be removed. School children whispered about creepy activity in the building, and locals told tales of the steady stream of bodies being carried out. Clovis continued on as a convalescent home through the 1980s and fell into great disrepair. The facility finally closed its doors in 1992. But just because the building shut down, that didn't mean it remained empty. Was crept around the grounds looking for signs of ghosts. If they were chased off by the police, they were often scared away by unnatural events. The Clovis police were frequently called to the grounds, sometimes in response to 911 calls coming from the building. However, the great mystery is that there was no longer electricity or working phone line in the building. So exactly who was phoning the 911 operators from 2604 Clovis Avenue? The operators only heard dead air on the other end. In 1997, it was when it regained its popularity and was reopened as a Halloween-themed attraction. However, Mr. Todd Wolf, Mr. Todd Wolf quickly found out it wasn't going to be fun and games. Dark spirits continually harassed his staff. Wolf didn't believe in ghosts, and when he set out on his new adventure, but an experience with a shadowy figure in Mary's room changed his philosophy. Employees working around the house have not only seen ghostly apparitions, but some have been physically grabbed by unseen forces. At the time, it says Wolf currently hoped to turn Wolf Manor into a hotel, but there's no certainty that the building's current residents will approve. At the time of this article, it said, for now, the Clovis community carries on much as it has in the past. Some try their best to overlook the evil scar in their small town, while others hang rosary beads on the fence outside to ward off the dark spirits. It has since been demolished. A lot of people were kind of sad about that because it was kind of a local landmark. But yeah, that's the story of Wolf Manor in Clovis.
When was it demolished?
Oh, I'd have to look at that, Scott. It wasn't that long ago. I think it was maybe...
I think it was pretty recently.
Yeah, last 5 years maybe.
Because I want to say that when I was still living in Fresno, I think it may have still been there.
Yeah.
I think when we talked last year, it was still standing, wasn't it?
It might actually. You know what? Let's see. I'm gonna find the date right now, sir. Looks like 2014.
Oh,
yeah. So not that long ago at all.
Yeah.
There's a couple places in Fresno like that where I just like didn't even like, as much as I like scary stuff. Because I go on the Queen Mary all the time. Like I said, I would not. Like I would never go over there. And there's also an old was it a TB, I think, sanitarium in the middle of downtown Fresno. I would never go in there ever.
Yeah,
that's like asking to get scratched by some sort of poltergeist or like thrown down an elevator shaft or something. Nah, I'm good.
Yeah,
I don't need to go there.
Yeah, but Scott, to add to that, my mom said that she just I mean, she would be in places like the basement or storage rooms getting things, and she just always felt uneasy. She said she just felt like a presence she couldn't explain. Just like something was in the room with her. She couldn't explain it. Didn't really know what it was. She just didn't feel right in some of the areas in the hospital wing or the sanitarium area. So yeah, it was kind of an interesting story to hear that my mom had an actual, a personal story about the place. I didn't hear that obviously until I was much older, but kind of creepy, man.
Yes.
Yes. Darren, you're up, my friend. What do you got for us this evening?
Well, I got a really short one about an area outside of about an hour north of Birmingham called Lynn, Alabama. Mm-hmm. And this one is also kind of like Resurrection Mary. It is about not a hitchhiking ghost, but a ghost connected to a road. So this is about a woman who along Highway 5 was killed by a trucker on that stretch of road. And the legend is that she travels up and down that road in the afterlife looking for her killer. So what she does is that like truckers have reported hearing banging on the doors of their cabs as they're driving down Highway 5, and some have said they'll look over and they'll see a ghostly face looking in the looking in the cab of their trucks as they're going, like because she's trying to track down her killer. So it's they've and some of the legends say that they'll like when they pull off or when they get to a truck stop, they'll see like ghostly footprints on their like on the outside of the cab, like she was stepping up to the to look in the windows. It looked to look into the cab, and it's basically that stretch of road on Highway 5, like a lot of truck drivers tend to avoid it, and that's why.
Yes, yeah, I'd be avoiding there too, man.
Yeah.
That's good stuff, Scott. What did you hear about Wolf Manor? Because I know we talked about it last time.
I knew where you guys were located, and I wanted to make sure I talked about something local to you.
Yeah.
So I just looked it right up on the internet.
Gotcha.
So I probably had the same information that you were just reading. I just did it in my own words.
Yes. Yeah. I went to the hunt, man. I know there was a couple of spots in there that just seemed really like, and it wasn't like it wasn't because I was scared of the haunted house. I mean, I walked through the first one, and there was a couple times that they got me on a couple of jump scares. But other than that, I was just kind of like taking in the scenery. And I know I can specifically recall one room, and it might have been the room they're referring to as Mary's room, where I just kind of looked around. And I was like, room by myself, because the girls I was with kept running ahead of me, and I would just kind of lag behind, and I was like, I do not want to be in this room right now. And I just kind of walked really abruptly to the next room. Yeah, it was kind of creepy, man. Scary stuff. But Scott Larson, what are you doing tomorrow for Halloween?
My wife and I are having neighbors over, and we are planning to be out on the front porch with basically the whole neighborhood handing out candy to people. One of the things is we have nice weather here in Chicago, so I think it's supposed to be like 40-ish and rainy and cold.
Yep.
Last Friday,
that is nice weather for Chicago.
Well, we had a Friday here a couple weeks ago that was 90 degrees, and then the Friday of the next week was 38.
Oh my God!
So yeah,
we had it bad here in California, but yeah, no, that's nothing compared to you, man.
Yeah, so I'm, it's on the one hand, it's something we're looking forward to, and then on the other hand, it's like I don't want to be outside. It's gonna suck.
Exactly, man. Christina, what is on your agenda for Halloween 2017 tomorrow?
Brian and I will also be passing out candy. I guess the thing to do in Texas is to sit like in front of your garage and like with bowls of candy, which is kind of great because that means I don't have to keep getting up and down and yelling at my dog to not bark at the door when somebody rings the doorbell. So I'll probably throw together a costume. Not sure what yet. It'll be a surprise tomorrow. And then just sit out there and talk to the kiddos.
Yeah, awesome, my friend. Darren, I know you're the resident family man. What do you got going on with the Niños tomorrow?
Tomorrow, parties and trick-or-treating and costumes and Ghostbusters and proton packs and ghost traps and running around and trying to make sure one of them doesn't run into the street.
The wise planter.
Pretty much.
How old are your kids?
I got 2 boys, 11 and 3. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent, my friend. Uncle Will gets to go to the sister's house and make Halloween goodies like cookies and things, and then go trick or treating. Which, for a 3-year-old and an almost year-old, it's like that's about like 30 minutes of walking, and then that's about it.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna go out to one of our local little like pub haunt areas in Fresno. Christina knows I'm talking about the Tower. And because my main part of my Halloween costume didn't come in time for me to wear it this weekend to all the parties I went to. And so I was like, I gotta at least bust it out somewhere, at least for a little bit. I gotta work early the next day, so I'm not staying out late. But you know, I'm gonna go make an appearance. And I was talking to Darren. The place I'm going to is doing a karaoke costume contest. So if you sing karaoke in your costume, you get entered into a second contest. And they recommended you singing something that kind of like ties in with your character whole thing. And I'm thinking, what would Freddy Krueger sing on karaoke? So I came up with Marilyn Manson's version of Sweet Dreams. You know, by the
yeah.
mix.
Or you could do Weezer. You could do Weezer only in dreams too.
Okay,
no,
that's a good one.
I got the perfect one. These Dreams by Heart.
Oh, these dreams, yes, with the claws and everything.
But you have to do the Freddy voice though with it too to make it even more realistic.
Yes. These dreams.
So every second of the night, I live another life.
Yes, that's
do
good.
it.
Yes, we'll have to see. But friends, if you want to check out my my full I posted another little spoiler image of my costume. I tried everything on tonight, and I'll be dropping that on the Twitters right after the show, so you can check it out. Friends, as always, thank you for joining us. Mr. Scott Larson, again, man, thank you for coming on and sharing ghost stories and all your amazing, cool paranormal adventures you have throughout the year, my friend. And man, one of these years, man, I'm going to just surprise you and make my way down to Chicago. And I want to tell ghost stories with you in person, man.
That'll be awesome. Before we wind up, there's one thing I have to mention. How many people here who have seen that movie, The Mothman Prophecies?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen it?
Yep.
Did you know that he has been sighted in Chicago since January of this year? There has been 58 sightings of him.
What?
Yeah. Look it up. He's here. I think it's because the Cubs won the damn World Series last year. It was the first opening of the seal of the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm. The seventh seal of the apocalypse.
Right.
They've upset the balance.
No, the payment is due. They've won. Somebody's soul is on the somebody's
blood must be paid.
Exactly.
That Scott, thank you, man. Now I'm not going to sleep.
Well, you're not here. I'm the one who should be staying awake.
I know. But I think it's going to channel my way because my best friend is a huge Cubs fan. So, yes, something's coming my way too. It's not fair.
Right.
So as long as it stays on the north side.
Yes. But Scott, my friend, thank you as always. Can you tell our listeners? Are you going to be at any other upcoming conventions where they might be able to meet you in person at?
I think I am done for 2017. I am looking into doing some conventions outside of Chicago next year. So my hope is to do Baltimore. And there's another one that's on the list. I'm drawing a blank on what it is off the top of my head right now. But I'm planning to start stretching out and getting out of Illinois and seeing what else is out there and who else would be interested in the book.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, thank you, sir. And when does the next issue drop, my friend?
I really wanted it out by now, but I'm thinking probably around April. And actually, hold on one sec.
Yes, we're holding. Are we getting exclusively cool stuff, guys? It's always good. Who's excited for Halloween, friends?
Yeah.
Here's the cover for it.
Oh,
that's cool.
Looks awesome.
Yes,
guys. And it's about half vibe to it. Done, so, but it's coming. It's coming really soon, and I'm hoping to have the painted issue done really soon after, but I doubt that's going to happen. So these things are coming out around March or April of every year.
Yes. Awesome. Well, buddy, thank you, my friend. Happy Halloween. Everybody, please check out Scott Larson online and check out his book, Visitations. Buddy, I look forward to having you back again sometime, man. It's always a good time. When
Thanks so much.
You, my friend. Darren, what do you got for your final thought, sir?
Just enjoy the holidays. Eat as much candy as you want to because you don't have that much candy eaten left in this life.
That's true. You never know, man.
Exactly.
You never know when you've just unwrapped your last Snickers bar.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Exactly.
buddy. Have a good time tomorrow with the kiddos, man. Have lots of fun. Take lots of cute pictures and send them our way.
I will.
Awesome.
I'm so
Christina,
excited to see the Ghostbuster costumes.
yes. Christina, my friend, what you got for your final thought this evening?
I'm just excited for Halloween. It's my favorite, and everyone should have a spoopy time. And be safe if you're drinking. Get an Uber. Don't drink and drive. Blah blah blah. You know how to take care of yourselves, but don't drink and drive. Seriously. Yes, eat all of the candy. Drink all of the hot buttered rum, and just have a good time. Life's too short to not have a good time.
Yep.
Love it, friend. Awesome. Let's see. For my final thought, I was just gonna say. I know we didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I think I have like 2 episodes left of Stranger Things season 2, and I freaking love it. This is I don't know.
It's
I just
great.
feel like this season is like so much more intense and exciting, and it's beautiful. And I love as always, I love all the geeky like 80s nostalgia that they mix into the show. It's like being a kid again. It's so beautiful to be able to watch and live vicariously through these young kids who are super talented. Because when I was their age, I was a wuss, man. I was scared of my own shadow back at that age. I didn't want to go out and look for ghosts or fight demogorgons or anything like that. So this is what I aspired to be like when I was a kid. I was just too afraid and too over sheltered to be that way. So it's a fun a beyond fun, slightly spooky, perfect for a Halloween season show. So check it out. We'll talk more about it next week when it's been out for a little longer and the rest of the crew has caught up. But as always, friends, please keep checking us out on thegww.com for all the latest in the geek world regarding movies, comics, TV, tech, and so much more. Please check us out on Twitter at _GeekSidePod, where the crew resides for this show. And you can find me on Twitter at Darth Sparrow. Have a spooktacularly exciting Halloween tomorrow, friends. We look forward to catching you back next week at our normal time on Wednesday. And as always, we'll catch you on the geek side, or should we say the spooky side?